Artemis III was supposed to land humans on the moon. That was the plan. 2 astronauts would descend to the lunar South Pole, step onto the surface, and become the first people to walk on another world since Gene Cernan climbed back into the Apollo 17 lunar module in December 1972. The first woman, the first person of color, the symbolic and scientific culmination of a program that has been in development in various forms since 2005. Originally, the landing was scheduled for 2024. Then it slipped to 2025. Then 2026. Then January 2026, when NASA officially delayed it again. And then, in February 2026, NASA did something it had never done before. It did not delay the mission. It changed what the mission was. Artemis III is no longer a lunar landing. It is now an Earth orbit docking test. The crew will launch aboard SLS and Orion, fly to low Earth orbit, and practice connecting with one or both commercial lunar landers, SpaceX Starship HLS, and Blue Origin Blue Moon. They will test docking mechanisms, evaluate life support, run through rendezvous procedures, and come home. They will not go to the moon. They will not leave Earth orbit. The actual landing has been pushed to Artemis IV, now targeted for early 2028. NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman described the restructured mission as necessary, comparing it to Apollo 9, the 1969 mission that tested the lunar module in Earth orbit before Apollo 11 landed 4 months later. It is a reasonable comparison. Apollo 9 was a critical test flight, but there is a difference between Apollo 9 and Artemis III that nobody in a position of authority wants to acknowledge. Apollo 9 flew because the hardware was ready to test. Artemis III is flying in Earth orbit because the hardware is not ready for the moon. As of today, April 2026, here is what remains not decided about Artemis III. NASA has not finalized whether the mission will fly in low Earth orbit or high Earth orbit. A low orbit saves hardware for Artemis IV. A high orbit better simulates the thermal conditions near the moon. Both have trade-offs, and NASA has not chosen. NASA has not decided whether Artemis III will dock with one lander or both. That decision depends on how fast SpaceX and Blue Origin can get their vehicles to orbit, which depends on development timelines that have slipped repeatedly. The crew has not been announced. The mission design has not been published. Isaacman said specifics would come closer to the 2027 launch. Axiom Space confirmed in April 2026 that it is working toward testing its Axiom spacesuit in 2027, but has not decided whether that test will happen on Artemis III or on the International Space Station. The suit that astronauts will wear on the moon might not even be tested on the mission that is supposed to validate it. And all of this assumes the Orion spacecraft itself is ready to fly again in 15 months. It is not clear that it will be. Artemis II just came home with a list of problems that each require engineering changes before the next flight. The heat shield returned with divots and cracking, the same failure mode observed on Artemis I in 2022. NASA has announced that Artemis III will fly with a redesigned AVCoat formulation, one with improved porosity that lets trapped gases vent instead of building pressure beneath the surface. That formulation has never flown. Its first flight will be on Artemis III with crew aboard. The service module carried a helium leak in the oxidizer pressurization system throughout the Artemis II mission, with leak rates an order of magnitude higher in space than during ground testing. Kshatriya acknowledged that the valve system would likely need an extensive redesign, but added that Artemis III as a low Earth orbit mission would not require the same pressurization performance as a lunar orbit insertion burn. That statement is telling. It means the service module fix is being deferred to Artemis IV. Artemis III will fly with a service module that NASA knows cannot perform the burns required for a lunar mission. The toilet failed at least twice during Artemis II. The satellite phone system glitched during recovery. A latching current limiter failed, a failure type first documented on Artemis IV 4 years ago and still unresolved. Each of these requires time, engineering time, testing time, manufacturing time, integration time. The window between now and mid-2027 is roughly 15 months. For context, the Artemis II Orion spacecraft took years to assemble and test. The production of the Artemis III Orion is ongoing, with an internal readiness date of January 2028. NASA and Lockheed Martin have taken steps to accelerate that timeline to meet the mid-2027 launch target. But accelerating spacecraft production is not like accelerating a software release. Every component has to be tested. Every change has to be validated. Every modification to the heat shield, the valves, the toilet, the current limiters has to be integrated, inspected, and certified for flight. 15 months is extremely tight. The Artemis program has never once met an original schedule target. Then there are the landers. The landers remain unproven and risky. SpaceX's Starship HLS has never reached orbit with a crew. It has never performed an orbital refueling. The propellant depot it needs to refuel in low Earth orbit does not exist. SpaceX is preparing for its first integrated orbital refueling demonstration, scheduled for mid-2026. If that test slips, or fails, or reveals problems that require redesign, the cascade effect on Artemis III's timeline is immediate. Even for the Earth orbit docking test, Starship HLS has to get to orbit, and it has to do so on a schedule that aligns with the SLS launch. SpaceX has been iterating rapidly on Starship, but rapid iteration and crew-rated reliability are fundamentally different goals. Blue Origin's Blue Moon has also never flown. It is smaller, more conventional, and facing its own development challenges. Neither company has completed an uncrewed landing demonstration on the Moon, which NASA requires before crew flies inside either vehicle. That uncrewed demo is currently targeted for 2027. If it slips, Artemis IV slips with it. Consider the schedule history of this program. In 2019, the Vice President announced a 2024 landing target. By 2021, NASA acknowledged 2024 was not achievable. In 2023, the landing was pushed to 2025. In 2024, the Government Accountability Office determined that a 2025 landing was unlikely and predicted 2027 at the earliest. In late 2024, NASA delayed to 2026. In January 2026, it slipped again. In February 2026, the landing was removed from Artemis III entirely and pushed to Artemis IV in 2028. That is 6 delays in 7 years, and at every stage, the people making the schedule believed they were being realistic. They were wrong every time. There is nothing in the current plan that suggests 2028 will be different. The same dependencies exist. The same contractors are building the same hardware. The same political environment is funding the program year to year. The only thing that has changed is the number on the calendar. The Inspector General's report from March 2026 identified gaps in NASA's testing approach for the landers. The report noted that planned demonstrations would not be fully representative of the crewed vehicles, meaning the first time these landers carry astronauts in their final configuration could be the actual mission, not a test flight. The report also flagged the Starship HLS elevator, the only way for astronauts to travel 115 feet between the cabin and the lunar surface, as a top risk with no validated backup method of vehicle ingress. And it stated plainly that if astronauts encounter a life-threatening emergency on the lunar surface, NASA does not have the capability to rescue them. These are Artemis IV problems, not Artemis III problems, in the strictest sense. Artemis III will not land on the Moon. But that distinction reveals the deeper issue. Artemis III exists in its current form specifically because the landing hardware is not ready. If the landers were ready, Artemis III would be a lunar landing. The fact that it isn't tells you everything about where the program actually stands. And if the landers are still not ready by the time Artemis III flies, what was the point? An Earth orbit docking test only matters if it leads to a landing. If Artemis IV slips, the docking test becomes an isolated demonstration that proved nothing useful about the program's ability to reach the Moon. Behind all of this is the budget. The SLS costs roughly $4 billion per launch. The Artemis program has consumed tens of billions already. In May 2025, the Trump administration's budget proposal called for canceling SLS and Orion after Artemis III. The program survived that threat when funding was preserved in July 2025 legislation. But the next budget cycle is coming, and the one after that. Every time the timeline slips, the cost increases. Every time the cost increases, the political support weakens. Every time the political support weakens, the next budget fight becomes more dangerous. The Lunar Gateway was canceled in March 2026. The SLS Block 1B upgrade was canceled in February 2026. Both were cut to save money and simplify the program. Those decisions were presented as strategic focus. They were also acknowledgments that the program cannot afford everything it promised. China's crewed lunar program is targeting 2030. If Artemis IV lands in 2028, America gets there first. If Artemis IV slips to 2029, the margin is a year. If it slips to 2030, it is a race. If it slips past 2030, China wins. And every delay to Artemis III pushes Artemis IV further out, because you cannot fly a lunar landing until you have flown the docking rehearsal. And you cannot fly the docking rehearsal until the landers are ready. And the landers depend on orbital refueling technology that has not been demonstrated, built by companies that have never delivered a crewed vehicle beyond Earth orbit. There is a failure mode for programs like this that is worse than cancellation. It is a slow death by delay. Every time a mission slips, the engineers and technicians who built the hardware get older. Some retire. Some leave for the private sector. The institutional knowledge that makes a program like this possible does not live in documents. It lives in the people who have touched the hardware, who have solved problems that the documents do not describe, who know which weld on which panel tends to crack under which conditions. NASA lost that knowledge after Apollo. It took decades to rebuild. If Artemis stalls, if the cadence breaks, if the gap between missions stretches from months to years, the same erosion begins again. You do not just lose time. You lose the people who know how to use the time. Artemis III might fly in 2027. It might work perfectly. It might validate the docking, prove the suits, demonstrate the landers, and set the stage for the first lunar landing in over half a century. That outcome is possible. But the honest assessment, based on everything that has happened and everything that remains undecided, is that Artemis III is the most uncertain mission in the program's history. Not because the engineering is impossible, because the engineering, the budget, the politics, and the development timelines all have to converge at the same point. And right now, they are diverging. Nobody in a position of authority will say this, because saying it invites the question that nobody wants to answer. If Artemis III might never happen, what does that mean for the moon? The answer is that the moon becomes a destination that America has been trying to return to for 2 decades and has not yet managed to reach. A place where 12 men walked between 1969 and 1972, and then nobody walked again. Not because we forgot how, because we could not agree for long enough and with enough money to do it again. If you want to keep exploring what the universe is really doing, subscribe. I will see you in the next one.